So this is the General and Interpreter Volunteer Training for the Citizenship Day program. Thank you guys for joining us. Quick overview of what we're going to talk about. We'll go briefly through the benefits and the barriers to citizenship, very briefly through the legal requirements for citizenship, kind of basic eligibility, mainly for background for you guys. Red flags, people who should not apply for citizenship. We'll go through the logistics and what we expect of volunteers at a Citizenship Day event. We'll talk through the stations and the guidelines for people who are working as interpreters. We'll go ahead and skip the remote viewing option. So what is Citizenship Day? It's a day-long free legal clinic, and our goal is to help as many eligible legal permanent residents apply for citizenship. And this program was actually founded in 2004 by the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and they used to do one Citizenship Day in one city every year, and now we do something like 13 every year, and it's one of the only free programs of this type that still exists. Since 2008, more than 4,000 people have been able to fill out their applications for citizenship at Citizenship Day. So there are a ton of benefits to applying for U.S. citizenship as opposed to being just a regular legal permanent resident. One of the biggest is only U.S. citizens can vote. There are certain federal jobs and other public positions that require U.S. citizenship. You can run for public office, you can access federal financial aid and certain scholarships that are only available to citizens. You can never be deported as a U.S. citizen. A green card does not guarantee one against deportation. It doesn't guarantee you admission at the border after a trip abroad. And so having a U.S. passport can really be a good thing to have. And then one of the biggest benefits that a lot of our clients cite at Citizenship Day is the ability to sponsor their family members who live in their home country to immigrate to the U.S. Parents, spouses, children, brothers and sisters. And then if they have children who live with them in the U.S. already, who are under 18, they can derive citizenship through their parents automatically. So with all of those wonderful benefits, why don't more people apply? Just in Washington state alone, there are about 180,000 green card holders who are eligible for U.S. citizenship, but less than 10% of them have applied. And that's because there's a number of barriers associated with the process. The form itself costs $680 to file, and then retaining an attorney starts at about $1,000, and it's really smart for a lot of people to have competent legal assistance and representation throughout this process. Difficulties with English can be a huge barrier for people, as there is an English requirement associated with applying. There's not very much legal assistance available, much less affordable legal resources, especially in like the rural areas of the state. And then the process itself is really complicated and hard to understand and can generate a lot of fear in potential applicants because it is long, it's arduous, it's hard to understand. Okay, so the responsibilities of volunteers at Citizenship Day. Number one are to come prepared. We want everyone to be able to review the station instructions beforehand, so all of the station's duties and responsibilities are familiar to you. You could be stationed at one of a number of different stations. We ask that you adhere to our policies and procedures. Ask the OneAmerica staff who are present or other volunteers who have come to Citizenship Day often when you have questions. Be kind and courteous to all clients, and be flexible. This day can be very it can change very rapidly. There's a huge flow of clients, and so we ask you to be flexible and move around as the needs of the day change. So super quick, the basic eligibility requirements for someone to file for citizenship: you have to be at least 18 years old, you have to meet certain residency requirements. Physical presence requirements are a little different from residency. Residency has to do with where you maintain your primary residence or your primary home, and physical presence is actually how many days out of a certain period of time did you physically spend inside the United States. All applicants for naturalization do need to prove good moral character. This can be a fairly complicated concept. Clients need to be able to read, and write basic English. There are some exceptions to that, but generally English is a requirement. They must have a basic knowledge of U.S. history and civics, and they must be willing to take the oath of allegiance to the United States. So I mentioned this not too long ago, but any child who's under 18 automatically becomes a citizen when at least one of their parents naturalizes. And the only conditions for that are the child must be a lawful permanent resident, they must have a green card, and they must be residing in the physical and legal custody of that citizen parent. So this won't be super important for your role as a volunteer, but I just want to go through a little bit more in depth with the requirements, mainly so that people have kind of a background understanding of how complicated the naturalization law and process can be, because I think it helps people appreciate kind of the process that potential citizens have to go through in order to access it. So a legal permanent resident, in order to apply for U.S. citizenship, has to be residing in the U.S. for at least 5 years and have that LPR card for at least 5 years. If they're married to a U.S. citizen spouse, they're allowed to apply early. It's under the 3-year rule, so as long as they are married to that U.S. citizen spouse and have their LPR card for 3 years, they can apply early. The residence must be continuous. Absences or trips abroad are allowed, but they cannot exceed a certain length, or USCIS considers that that person has broken their residence in the U.S. They must live in the state where they file the N-400 for at least 3 months. They must reside in the U.S. from the time they file their application to when they take their oath. Small trips are allowed, but they can't actually move their residence. And they are allowed to apply 3 months before they hit that 3-year mark or the 5-year mark. And that's because from the time of filing to the interview, it generally takes a long time, anywhere from 4 to 8 months, depending on which office. Here are some examples of green cards. They have changed quite a bit over the years, but one thing that a lot of them have in common is that they are not green. So physical presence requirements are a little bit different than the residency. The person who is applying must have been physically present in the U.S. for at least half of the previous 5 years, or if they're married to a U.S. citizen and they're applying along that fast track rule, they have to be present for at least half of the last 3 years. And so part of the form will ask them to tally up the days that they spent outside the U.S. On trips of various kinds to make sure that they meet that requirement. The next requirement to apply is applicants must show that they have good moral character. And I don't show this to expect you to know all of this or memorize it, but just to show how complicated naturalization law is. And these are the things that our attorneys and paralegals will be looking for at Citizenship Day as they help people fill out the form, because any of these criminal convictions or charges or even arrests can really cause problems. They automatically preclude someone from being able to apply for citizenship. These are bars that don't automatically prevent someone from qualifying, but the adjudicating officer may use them as a reason to deny. And so these are other things that our attorneys and paralegals are really well versed on and know to recognize. It's quite a complicated process. So English language ability, this is determined at the client's interview, which will be, again, anywhere from 4 to 8 months after the person applies. It's said that the English that's tested is about at a 4th grade level. That's about the level that someone would need to have in order to be able to pass that interview. They must be able to read and write at least 1 or 2 basic sentences. But there are exemptions for people of a certain age who have had their residency for a certain amount of time. So you have to be at least 50 years old and have had your green card for 20 years. And you can take the history and civics test in your own language, and you don't need to prove ability to speak English. The same applies if you're 55 years old and have at least 15 years of legal permanent residency. So we shorten those and call them the 50-20 rule or the 55-15 rule. There's also something called the disability waiver, which is something that a medical doctor must fill out to explain that this person is medically unable to learn English. And it's a very strict standard. We don't do them at citizenship days. We don't have doctors on site who can fill those out. But unfortunately, old age or illiteracy don't count. It really has to be a medical condition. U.S. history and civics. I'm sure some people have heard about the infamous civics exam. It's pretty difficult for naturalization. Clients are given 100 questions that they have to study and memorize. The officer will give them 10, and they have to answer 6 correctly. If they're exempt from the English requirement, they still have to take the civics test, but they need to study and take it in their own language. There's a simplified version of the U.S. history and civics test for those who are at least 65 years old and have had their green card for 20 years. People who fall under that only have to study 20 questions, and then they're given 10, and they have to answer 6 correctly in the language of their choice. Applying for citizenship can actually be fairly dangerous for people with certain criminal convictions or other issues. If USCIS finds that someone has committed an aggravated felony at any time, has falsely claimed U.S. citizenship, has given misleading information to a government official, a CIMT is a crime involving moral turpitude, which covers anything from shoplifting to various degrees of assault and a whole host of other crimes. If someone has voted unlawfully, or if there was any kind of misrepresentation involved in getting their green card, those issues will usually be discovered during the naturalization investigation process, and that person could be placed in removal proceedings. So one of the most important things that we do at Citizenship Day is not just help people apply who qualify, but also make sure that other people who should never apply get really sound legal advice and know the risks and know that this could be an issue. Once someone has totally filled out their N-400, they will submit it by mail along with 2 passport-style photos, a check or money order for the $680 fee, or a request for a fee waiver. They'll need to submit a copy of both sides of their green card and send it by certified mail. Okay, so I want to transition over to what to expect at one of our citizenship days. Volunteers should arrive, I say no later than 8:30, but really earlier than that would be good, around 8, to give you enough time to get settled in and get coffee and have breakfast, because we will start site orientation right at 8:30. Between 9:30 and 9:45, we want all volunteers to be in their stations, because at 10 a.m. is when we officially open the doors to clients. A lot of clients arrive anywhere from 2 or 3 hours early to get in line, just because they know that this is a huge demand event. We have them start filling out the intake form as soon as they get there, so that the first group at least is ready to go at 10 o'clock. The doors close at 3, but do expect to stay, depending on your station, until about 5. We finish up with the clients who are there, who are in process, and so sometimes we're out of there at 5, sometimes it's a little bit later. Right at 10 a.m., the attorney volunteers will start screening the first round of clients, and the paralegals will receive those clients after the screening is done, which takes anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour. And it is important to be flexible, since the volume of clients can really ebb and flow. We've had citizenship days where we've been able to stay open all day, and other times where there's a line out the door already at 8 o'clock, and we let everyone in, and by 10:15 we aren't seeing anyone new, because we already have 60, 70, sometimes more people. So there are 6 stations at a Citizenship Day site: intake, attorney, forms preparation or the paralegal station, quality review, the copy station, and the exit station. And we'll go through these in more detail in a second. But it's important to note that there is someone called the flow manager, who's kind of the OneAmerica person in charge. And as clients move through these stations, they will check in with the flow manager in between each one, just to make sure that all of the boxes are checked and we can keep track of where everyone is in the process. All right, so the first station is the intake station. The client will check in at the front desk. The intake volunteer who's stationed there will do just a super basic check just to make sure that, is this person here to apply for citizenship? And did they bring their green card, and maybe do they have other documentation with them? Their green card is the absolute #1 thing they need to bring. We can't proceed unless they have their green card. And some, depending on their situation, may need to bring other documentation. If they've ever been arrested or charged with any criminal issues, they need to have documentation about that. If they've been married or divorced, they need to bring those certificates. And they should know about those requirements, since that was on every flyer that we've distributed, the list of documents to bring. Sometimes people will come and they'll have other questions that are immigration related and they want to talk to an attorney and they want to get advice about something else. We only do citizenship applications at Citizenship Day. No other applications, no kind of general questions or consultations, because it really does slow up the day. We'll have attorney referral lists at the front of the room. We'll have other referrals that you can give people, but nothing else besides citizenship applications. So the person will sign in. They'll put their full name, phone number. They'll be number ordered so we can keep track of when everybody arrived, maintain that order. Then the volunteer will give the client this intake and screening form to fill out while they're waiting. And it's yellow and blue, and you should, if you're accessing the form via attachment, it'll be all white, but you can follow along according to the screenshots. So the volunteer will fill in the date and the client number, which is when the person, or the arrival number, which is when the person arrived. They'll note whether the client needs an interpreter, yes or no, and then stop. The rest of the form where it says screening, that will actually be completed by the attorney. The yellow form is completed by the attorney and other volunteers, and then the blue form, where it says intake form, is actually where the client starts filling it out. And so this is something that every client needs to fill out as completely as possible when they arrive. And it covers their biographical data, any marriages or divorces, the children that they have, all of their addresses that they've lived at, jobs they've had, all trips outside the U.S., and then most importantly, any criminal issues or interactions with the police that they've ever had. So we want at least a couple intake volunteers to wander around the waiting area in case people have questions. The client should fill this form out as completely and honestly as possible. The flow manager, which we mentioned before, is a designated OneAmerica staff person. They'll be introduced to you at the beginning of the day, and they're kind of the gatekeeper. So all clients will proceed through the flow manager between stations. So at 10 a.m. there'll be a good group of clients who are waiting, who have had their intake forms filled out, and the flow manager will call them out by name in the order that they arrived. They'll verify that the intake is complete, and then each client will be sent to the attorney station. We'll have a couple of volunteers who will be stationed as runners who can escort clients to and from the flow manager. The easiest way for this to work is for the flow manager to stay in one place and for runners to escort clients to and from, because that way no one loses track of him or her, we don't have to chase them down, and they're able to better keep track of all clients' progress throughout the day. So I want to do a little demo of this. This will work. Okay, so this is a demo of the intake station. So you'll see that the client is going to check in at the front desk. The intake volunteer will do a very basic check of the client's green card, make sure that they are there to apply for citizenship. If they have other documentation, they'll take a look at those. And then they'll ask the client to sign in with their full name and phone number, and they'll mark the order that they came in. Once the client is done signing in, they'll be given that yellow and blue intake form, and it helps to walk the client through what the form is and tell them where to start filling out. They want to start filling it out at the blue section. And then the client will go sit down in the waiting area to fill it out. And when they're done, they will raise their hand. It'll happen. There he is. Okay, he's done. So he grabs the runner or the volunteer who's in the intake area, and she'll look it over. She'll say, "Hey, flow manager, come on over. This looks good." So the flow manager should be wearing a OneAmerica shirt, and she will ensure that the client is ready to go to the attorney station, and then he will move on to the next station. Okay, hopefully that was helpful to kind of visualize that in action. We'll have a couple of those demos throughout the training. All right. We'll have an area set up in the waiting area to show the Making Citizenship Affordable video, and this is just a really short 17-minute video to help people understand their options for financing the citizenship process. The fee waivers that are available, the citizenship loans that are offered by certain credit unions, and then just basic tips on budgeting and saving. The number one reason that clients are unable to file the form, even when it's completed, is because they just don't have the money. Sometimes people call us after having attended Citizenship Day 3, 4, 5 months later and say, "I finally saved up and I can send it in," or they still haven't been able to. So the video is there for people to watch while they're waiting, and hopefully they can get some good information from that. So from about 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. before we open, there will be clients there waiting, and so we'll have a couple volunteers stationed at that intake desk to escort those who have arrived early and already completed their intake form. They're just kind of waiting around to that video area. They'll give them a survey before the video. They'll answer questions before and after. And that just helps us make some tweaks to it if there are things that they wanted to learn that they didn't get out of it, or if there are things that they liked, we want to know that. And we really want to do that between 9 and 10 because clients really have nothing else to do during that point if they've already filled out their intake form, and it's really good information. So those volunteers will just guide those clients to that area, collect the surveys when they're done, and return them to the flow manager at some point. Okay, Station 2 is where attorneys and BIA accredited representatives, and those are legal workers who are accredited by the Bureau of Immigration Appeals to provide legal advice. So those two groups of people will be doing eligibility screenings with clients. The client will arrive, they'll sit down with the attorney, they'll review their intake form and ask those screening questions that you'll see on page 1 to determine if this client can proceed with their application at Citizenship Day. And after having gotten a very brief introduction into the requirements and the good moral character issues, you'll see kind of how those screening questions aim to get out that information. The goal of this is really to make sure that clients are honest as possible, disclose everything that could present them with a problem later on in the process so we can address it now. We'll have interpreters stationed in the attorney room to interpret as necessary. And then we'll have one general volunteer also stationed in the attorney room to serve as a runner, help with tech support if necessary. We'll have computers with Wi-Fi in those rooms, and sometimes attorneys need to look up court records online, and so that person can help with that. Okay, if there's any eligibility issues whatsoever, or if it seems like this client could be at risk to apply without representation, we refer them out. We have a really strong network of immigration attorneys who we refer to. There are other partner organizations that do low-cost legal services, and we refer those people out. It's not a good idea for them to apply at Citizenship Day because they need a representative at their interview and throughout the process. However, if the client is okay to fill out the full N-400, then the attorney is going to flag down the runner. The runner will bring the client to the flow manager, who makes sure that all those screening questions are filled out. And then the client will go to the forms completion station, where all of the paralegals will be, to actually fill out the form. It's 21 pages. It takes quite a bit of time, so many clients spend at least a couple hours with the paralegal to fill that out. Again, interpreters will be pulled in as needed to interpret between the paralegal and the client. Wherever possible, we try to match up a paralegal who speaks the client's language. Oftentimes we have a lot of Spanish-speaking paralegals and Spanish-speaking clients, so we try to match those up wherever possible, but sometimes it's not possible. For interpreters, we do have translated versions of that 21-page N400 form in Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese. So please use those to interpret. You don't want to be reading the N400 in English and having to translate in your head. That's really exhausting, and we have translated versions of the form. It also ensures that you use the exact right language to interpret the question exactly. And then we will also have 2 or 3 general volunteers assigned to this room who will be helping with tech support. So at sites where we do forms electronically, where we actually fill out that 21-page form on the computer, we need folks who are experienced with Dropbox, with using flash drives, who can troubleshoot any Wi-Fi issues, who know how to use Adobe PDF and Adobe Reader. And so if anyone has issues in that room, they can flag someone else and say, this Adobe PDF isn't saving, can you help? And they can figure that out. Since we'll be completing forms on the computer, we'll also need to be printing those out, and so sometimes there can be a huge line at the printer since we have anywhere from 10 to 15 paralegals working on computers filling out forms. And the printer may or may not be in that same room. So a couple of volunteers will be assigned as printer runners, and so someone will flag them down and say, I just filled out Maria Smith's form, can you please go get it? And they'll run to the other room or the printer to grab that completed application. Sometimes we need to print forms via a USB drive too, and so the volunteer will go print that. Once that N400 is completed, the client again goes through the flow manager who puts them in line to see their next attorney, who is called the quality review attorney. And this is where our most experienced attorney volunteers will be stationed. And so they'll actually review the client's totally completed N400 and I-912, and we didn't go over the I-912, but that's the application for the fee waiver. So a client will have one or both of those, and the attorney will see if there are any issues that could have been missed, if anything is filled out incorrectly and needs to be corrected. They'll review again the client's green card, and we'll have 3 or 4 general volunteers who will be assigned to that same room, again as tech support to help with Dropbox and USBs, and as printer runners. The quality review area is very busy for printing because sometimes we need to print whole applications again, sometimes we have to reprint just certain pages, and when you have 20 people doing that at once, it can be pretty hectic, so it's great to have people there to help. If the quality review attorney says, yes, this form looks great, this client is good to go, they will flag down a runner who will escort the client to the flow manager, who will be on to station number 5, which is the copy station. And these are just some additional notes about forms completion, but it depends on the site, but if we are doing forms on the computer, we really want to make sure that before we open to the public that all volunteers are comfortable using Adobe Reader and saving to a USB drive. We'll go over this at on-site orientation as well, so that everyone feels comfortable with saving and printing from the computers available. So the copy station is where clients get a full copy made of their completed application. And this is where at least 2 or 3 people will be stationed, and their job will be to make a full copy of the client's N400. It's 21 pages, front and back, and all their supporting documentation, which includes their green card, their fee waiver request if they have one. It's really important to copy both sides of the green card, and want to make sure we put it on the scan tray, not in the document feeder. We had a situation at an event where a green card got jammed in the document feeder, and then we didn't have the printer for the rest of the day, and the client did not get their green card back that day. get to figure it out the next day. And the copy volunteers will also package the application correctly to send it certified mail to USCIS. The copy volunteer is also there to talk through the assembly process with the client to make sure that they understand. You really want to explain that the client sends their original N-400, but they send copies of their other documents. So they don't send in their original green card. They send a copy of the green card, copies of their court records, and the original signed application. But the client also keeps the copy of their N-400 and the originals of their other documents. It's really important that they keep that copy of their completed application because that is what they will need to be very familiar with at their interview. Usually, it depends on which USCIS office they're applying to, but sometimes their interview will be 8 or 9 months after they apply, and so they really want to study that application because it is the basis for their interview. The copy volunteer will need to check off what they did on the checklist, which is on that yellow intake form. If you flip over the first page, it'll be at the top, and that's so just to reinforce so we don't forget that you copy both sides of the green card, copy the N-400, check those off as you go, and then do print your name and sign. And we ask that volunteers put their name on each checklist that they fill out, so that way, just in case something happens and we realize that one page of someone's form is missing, we can go back to that particular volunteer and say, is it possible that this page fell on the ground somewhere, or do you know what happened? At the copy station, please, after you check off this list, collect the client's intake form. Don't let them walk away with it. That's why we make it yellow and blue, so it's easy to recognize. We have a ton of white papers floating around at Citizenship Day, but this should be the only yellow and blue paper. This is because it's the only record that OneAmerica has of this person's participation. We don't keep a copy of their citizenship application. We just have this intake form, and that way we know which volunteers worked on their case, what was done, if they were found ineligible, why. Those records are really important. So after you fill out that section, if you're at the copy station, please keep that form. The copy station might be the single most important station at Citizenship Day because this is where we package everyone's application. You're the last person sometimes to see it before it gets mailed out. So do refresh yourself on the written instructions when you arrive. They'll be at the station, they'll be posted on the wall. It's one of the attachments in this email, or you may have them in front of you, called CD station instructions, so do review those. The copy machine is fairly slow at the beginning of the day, but starting at noon and especially around 2 or 3 gets really busy as a lot of clients are finishing up. If there's a long line of people waiting for copies, encourage them to visit the next station, which is the exit station, and they can fill out an exit survey and get their photo taken and do some other things as they wait while you make copies. Okay, we're going to do another little demo just so you can see sort of a mini version of the copy station in action. So the runner will bring the client to the copy station volunteer. The copy volunteer will collect the client's intake form, put it away, and then they will make copies of the client's completed N-400 and any supporting documentation if they have it. There's the copy. It's a very fast copy machine. They'll make copies of the supporting documentation. And then sometimes the client will forget to hand you their green card, so you'll want to ask for it if they don't give it to you, because it's super important that we copy both the front and back of the green card. And again, please don't put it in the document feeder, but rather put it on the glass screen. And then you will start compiling their application packet. So you'll put their original N-400 with the copies of their green card and the copies of their supporting documentation together. If they have their passport photos and their check, you will paperclip those to the top. A lot of people don't have their photos taken and they don't have their check ready on the day of, but we have actually placeholder slips of paper that say attach check here, attach photos here. to remind them to add those later before they send it. You'll package their application in a certified mail envelope, and we have those already assembled with the address label and the certified mail return receipt on it, but you'll want to walk the client through exactly what those mean and tell them that they need to take it to a post office window to mail. They can't just drop it in their own personal mailbox. You can have them fill out that return receipt postcard, fill out their name and address. That's what will come back to them once their packet is received by USCIS. And then just explain to them once more that they're going to mail their original application and copies of supporting docs, and then you've placed the copy of their application for them to keep in that blue folder. And every client will have a blue folder, which is kind of like a what to do next packet, and it has kind of a guide so that they know what to expect in terms of after they file their application, when they'll be contacted about fingerprints, when they'll be contacted about their interview, and the copy of their application will be right in that folder too. Okay, the last station of the day is the resource and exit station, and 3 or 4 people will be stationed here starting around 11. Similar with the copy station, there'll be a slower flow of people between 11 and 2 or so, and then it'll get very busy. At this station, we want clients to do our exit survey. This is how we know how we did, how they felt about the day. We're going to ask them if we can take their photo, if we can interview them, just very briefly about their experience and about their immigration story. It's really helpful to have a good base of client photos and stories, because whenever we apply for new funding or want to get media or anything like that, it helps to have photos and stories just kind of at the ready. And then if for some reason a client has made it all the way to resource and exit with their intake form, please do take that. Just be on the lookout for the blue and yellow form, and please grab that if they still have it. One thing to note, throughout the day, a lot of clients will receive a red slip, and a red slip means that they can't continue with their application at Citizenship Day for a lot of the reasons that we talked about earlier. If they're ineligible for any reason, whether it's a criminal issue, or maybe they haven't reached their 5 years yet, or they don't qualify for the English waiver and they really don't know enough English to meet the standard for the interview, we'll give them a little red sheet of paper that says, unfortunately, you can't continue with your application today for this reason, and the attorney will give them information on what they need to do. So maybe they need to hire private representation, or maybe they just need to study English. So they should know that. However, even though they can't fill out their form at Citizenship Day, they still pass through the exit station. And there's plenty of resources there that are available for them to take. So other service providers in the area, ESL classes in the area, the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, the attorney referral list if they don't have one already. And then again, we want to take that blue and yellow intake form from them. And I can't stress how important that is, that we really don't want someone to walk away with that blue and yellow intake form, because it's our only record of their participation. Sometimes a client will get a red slip at an event, they can't finish their application, and then they show up at another clinic, maybe 6 months, a year down the line, and it really helps us if we can look at their old intake form and see why they were red slipped in the first place. Because maybe they'll never be able to apply. Maybe they have a really major issue in their past that they should never apply for citizenship. That's helpful for us to know. But maybe the intake form says hasn't reached the 5-year mark, we'll need it in a year. That would be good for us to know, and we know that we can help them the next time they come. There are lots of other resources that will be laid out on this table, and you don't need to know each and every one of them, but do spend some time during the morning familiarizing yourself with what's there, so that when people come by, you can better advise them on things that they might want to pick up. Not all of these resources will be appropriate for everyone, but sometimes people see like a lot of papers laid out on a table and they don't bother to look at any of them because it's kind of overwhelming, and it has been a big day of paperwork. But we'll have some study guides for people to study for the English test, the Civics exam. We have Civics study guides in something like 8 or 9 languages. We've compiled a list of ESL classes and citizenship classes that are in the area, the closest place to get a passport photo taken, closest post offices, resources on the credit unions that offer citizenship loans, how to request court and police records, other referrals to low-cost immigration service providers. Know your rights information is really helpful and useful because it makes sure that people know what kind of rights they have if they're ever stopped by Immigration and Customs Enforcement or the police. And then there's some information from the Department of Justice on how to combat employment discrimination. So again, this station gets very busy near the end of the day, usually around 1 to 5 p.m. And usually what we do with volunteers is that some people will start out at intake at the beginning of the day, and then they'll move over to the resource and exit station. If there is a line, again, at the copy machine, we'll ask that 1 or 2 exit volunteers kind of float over there and ask clients if we can take their photo, if they can talk to us a little bit about their story. We have a little sheet available there called What's Your New American Story? And this is just to kind of facilitate asking clients about their immigration story, why they're excited about citizenship. A lot of times when they're done for the day and they've gotten their form filled out, they are, excited and willing to talk about it. So this sheet, you can just put it on a clipboard and take a few notes. There's just like 3 suggested questions that you ask, and we just ask that you take a few notes, where they came from, why, what they're excited about, anything that they want to tell you. And then at the bottom of the page, which isn't on this slide, but you'll see it at the station, we'll ask them for their name, whether we can use their full name, or whether they prefer us to just use their first name, and also their physical description, because we'll take photos of them later and then we won't be able to match them up with their story. And sometimes we get a lot of great stories and a lot of great photos, but we don't know who's who. Last little demo for the day of the exit station. So the runner is going to bring over the client. The volunteer is going to collect the client's intake form if they still have it. Again, it should have been collected at the copy station, but sometimes they still have that yellow and blue form, so they'll hand that over. And then the volunteer is going to ask the client to complete our exit survey, and this is how we know how we did for the day. And they'll start filling that out. It's very short and it's available in English and Spanish. And the exit station is usually right next to the resource station, which is the table right next to it, and that's where we have a ton of resources that are available for clients in several different languages that we mentioned before. The volunteer will kind of tell the client what's available, ask them maybe how old they are, whether they qualify for the English waiver. They can give them information on ESL classes if that's necessary. And then we'll ask the client to maybe, if they're willing to have their photo taken. We have these little laminated signs that says, citizenship matters to me because, and so the person can fill that out. And we get a lot of really great responses for those, and then they can hold them up and we can take their photo. And it's pretty cool. Those photos come out really nicely. We'll ask them a little bit about their story, if we can interview them, and then the client is pretty much done for the day. So one last note that I want to mention for interpreters who are volunteering. So our general kind of protocol for interpreters when you're working with a client and a paralegal, or a client and an attorney, is to first have everyone introduce themselves, explain the procedure at the beginning, and explain to everyone that confidentiality is of utmost importance. Anything shared between that group does not go outside the group. Translation should be word for word, not paraphrasing or summarizing or saying, she said this, but really translating word for word. We do remind paralegals and attorneys to speak very slowly with pauses to allow for interpretation. And then another thing that's important The attorneys and the paralegals should look at the client and not the interpreter, because it is the client who's speaking and the interpreter is just kind of is kind of a pass-through. Interpreters, please remember to use those translated versions of the form. If they're not at the station, they'll be in a file box in the back of the room, and you'll be able to see the languages that are available. But using those translated versions is way easier than actually translating the form. Also remind the client to pause for interpretation where necessary. Don't let them go on for paragraphs without interpreting. And do take breaks, because interpreting can be very hard work and very tiring. On page 19 and 20 of the N400, you'll see part 14, it says the statement of applicants who used an interpreter. And sometimes this can be confusing, and we want to make sure that this is clear. Interpreters only need to fill out this statement if they both interpreted for the client and if the client is requesting the English exemption. So sometimes we have people who have basic level of English, they don't qualify for the exemption. They'll do their interview in English, but they prefer to work with an interpreter to fill out the form because it's a 21-page form, the language can be complicated, and we just want to make sure that there's 100% understanding on both sides. So if you're interpreting for someone who is going to do their interview in English, you do not need to fill this out. This is only for English exempt clients that you're interpreting for. Interpreters will often be employed as runners or at other stations like intake and exit while they're not interpreting for a client. We don't take appointments. Citizenship Day is totally first come, first serve, so we don't know ahead of time who's coming. Generally, we can count on the fact that there'll be a lot of Spanish speakers, but we don't know for other languages just how many we can anticipate. So if you interpret in a language probably other than Spanish, you may not have clients throughout the day that you're interpreting for, but you will be placed at other stations while you're not interpreting with a client. And we appreciate everybody's flexibility on that. So a few last notes. Do take time to read through the station instructions before Citizenship Day, because you could be assigned to any one of these stations. General volunteers and interpreters could be at intake, copy, exit, or resource, or employed as runners or tech support, which are all in that station instruction document. And that'll just go through step by step in even more detail than I've said right here. They'll also be posted at each station, but it does help to review them quietly beforehand because the day can be a little bit hectic and sometimes you don't have time to read through a couple-page document. And then finally, do watch your email because we'll be sending out some important updates as we get closer to the date. All right, thank you guys so much for volunteering. It really makes a huge difference for the clients that we work with. They always comment on how professional and kind volunteers have been. And someone remarked at the last event that I was at that, you know, as someone who's low income, they're used to being kind of treated like a number when they interact with social service agencies and other kind of free services. And they said it was very, it was a stark difference, and it was really nice to be treated kind of like a human being, so kindly and courteously at Citizenship Day, and with great respect. And that's because of you guys. This is our contact information. If you have questions, please do email us at any time if you have questions about the event or about any of the information that was presented.